Chapter 6, Sapphire, age 17, October. The wind rose, furling the edges of the drawings I had anchored on the Calcor seawall with rocks. My hair whipped in my eyes, and I grabbed at the strands, cursing under my breath as I felt snarls. I really should have asked Dagmar to plait it for me. She had magic hands when it came to hair. But she had just returned from court and was busy unpacking. Besides, she might have asked what I was doing and wanted to come with me if I had told her I was going riding, and then where would I be? I leaned against the wall, still holding back my errant hair with one hand, and surveyed the crowd milling past. Some grubby children ran by, chasing a hoop and laughing, a scraggly spotted dog loping after them, its tongue hanging out. I smiled to myself. The dog in particular looked like it was having a merry time. I would have to draw them later when I returned to the privacy of my chamber. I would have liked to have brought my sketchboard and drawn here, but I couldn't very well pass my sketches off as the work of my non-existent brother if I had charcoal smudges on my hands. I was becoming quite fond of my alter self, S. March, as I thought of him. Perhaps one of my brothers who had died in infancy would have been like him. Artistic and witty and hardworking. Someone I could have talked to about books and painting. Perhaps his spirit and my mother's spirit kept each other company in the afterlife. I was certain that after Mother had crossed over, she had found all the babies she had lost waiting for her, that they were together now, waiting for Father and then someday, Dagmar and me. My throat suddenly hurt, as if I'd swallowed a knife. It was exactly 3 years to the day of Mother's death. "You all right, miss?" came a gruff voice beside me, and I started. A burly, hairy man wearing the gold-piped blue frock coat of a ship captain peered at me, the grayish bristles of his brows knit together in a shallow V across his forehead. "I'm fine," I said, hearing to my chagrin a shrill quaver in my voice. "I like your hat," I added. He touched the brim of his black tricorn, gold-piped around the edges as well, with a friendly, if somewhat withered grin. There were gaps between several of his yellowish teeth. He had to be at least 60, or perhaps weathered older than his years by a hard life on the sea. No matter his age, though, his aura burned a lovely deep red, a fiery wine coloring the air around him. "Are you a sailor?" I inquired. "I'm captain of the Gallant," he said. "Have been for 10 years now. These yours?" He indicated the sketches with a broad sweep of his arm, the large gesture of a man accustomed to commanding others taller than him. "My brother's," I said, trying not to hesitate. The lie still came hard, even after telling it so many times. Perhaps even harder with each retelling. The words choked me, stones across my tongue, then tumbled to the ground with a harsh clatter that hurt my ears. "He's an odd fellow, isn't he?" the captain said, deep furrows in his brow as he examined the sketches. Oh dear. Yet another person who thought my faces in the bottle, my woman with the bird shadow, my old ones trudging their path to the sea were strange. Yet another person who didn't understand. I had been coming here for 2 months and had yet to sell one sketch. I didn't know why I still came, except I enjoyed observing the people go to and fro. It gave me ideas for more drawings that no one would likely ever buy. The captain paused over the last sketch, a simple rendering of Strawberry trotting across the pasture, her head high, her eyes bright as she listened to the clangs and metallic scrapes of Bolton preparing her mash in the old cauldron. "I like this one," he said. "Looks like a horse I had when I was a boy. How much?" I gaped at him, my mind blank. Had he just asked how much? I opened my mouth, then closed it again as I realized that I had no clue what I was about to say. I had thought briefly about prices when I started this venture, but now I could remember none of it. "Miss, how much?" he repeated. "How about a silver?" He grinned again, apparently amused at my obvious discomfiture. "Highway robbery, but I'll pay it because you blushed, and it warms my old heart that I can still make a pretty girl blush." I giggled, mostly from shock, as he fumbled in his pocket and then dropped a shining silver coin on my palm along with a dusting of blue lint. My fingers shaking, I stashed the coin in my satchel as he moved the rock from the sketch and then deftly rolled it up like the maps they kept on board ships. "Good day, miss," he said, and tipped his hat in my direction before he started walking toward the docks, whistling a sea shanty, the sketch tucked under one arm. "Oh dear," I muttered to myself. "Oh dear. What was this feeling inside? Needle pricks of excitement, yes, but also a brief cold shaft of emptiness. I would never see that sketch again after spending so many hours on it, making certain I caught that exact instant when 3 of Strawberry's hooves were airborne, the gleam of the setting sun over her chestnut flank, the dark glimmer of her large eyes, the spring of her freshly combed mane, the faint curl of her eyelashes. I must have sat on the paddock fence every evening for at least a week, waiting for that moment so I could capture it as precisely as possible. And now that moment was no longer mine. I had sold it. Now that moment was gone from my sight forever, perhaps to hang in the captain's cabin as he sailed across the Gilgan Sea to countries I would likely never see. My hands still trembling, I gathered up my remaining works and returned them to the portfolio, snapping it shut quickly when the wind began to howl again. The cathedral clock boomed thrice, which meant I probably could have stayed another hour and still been home in plenty of time to take care of Strawberry and then dress for dinner. However, after the shock of selling my first sketch, I doubted my ability to think clearly the rest of the day, and I had to keep my wits about me down here near the seawall. Although I was careful to come here at times I knew Peregrine was away at court, his sisters or mother or someone else who would recognize me might stroll by, and then where would I be? Also, despite the crowd, there was always the danger of a clever thief or worse kind of brigand waylaying me in an alley. So best to go home now, before I became too distracted with excitement. I retrieved Strawberry from the hitching post across the street, first shoveling her manure into the nearby cart so that I could claim back the copper I had left as a deposit. The man who owned the hitching post sold the manure in the cart for compost. Dagmar would have wailed at me for being unladylike. A true lady would never have cleaned up after her horse, but I didn't see the point in spending a whole copper to pay someone to do a job I could do just as well myself. Ladylike behavior be damned. I was no lady. Not anymore. I had engaged in common trade when I put my sketches out for sale, which meant I was no longer a lady. Perhaps Peregrine would hear of my improper behavior, decide I wouldn't be a fit wife for him, and leave me alone. God, I wish he would. I tossed the shovel aside with a sudden burst of vicious energy. When I galloped into the courtyard at home and dismounted, I saw a black horse tethered by the stable. As I led Strawberry to her stall, I paused by the stranger and hesitantly patted his neck. He grew still and regarded me with mild eyes. "You're an old soldier, aren't you?" I crooned to him, noticing the tiny grizzled hairs sprouting around his velvety nose. "That's Sir Mordred's horse Hunter," Bolton said as he emerged from the depths of the stable. "Fine animal. Of course, all the Landers' horses are fine." "That they are. Didn't Peregrine buy Trident from the Landers?" "He sure did." Bolton shook his head. "Only silver stallion I've ever seen. Seems a shame such a rare creature should be forced to carry that Barra ass." "Bolton!" I howled a laugh. "Oh, dear. Don't let father hear you say that." "Never fear, my lady. I know when to speak and when to stay silent. It's a skill you could stand to learn." I stamped my foot. "I already know my faults. How could I not? You, father, and Dagmar never fail to point them out." The wrinkles of his tanned face turned into shadowed creases as he grinned widely. "We lecture because we care so much, Lady Sapphire." "At least you see Peregrine's faults as well as mine. I wish Dagmar and father did." I frowned. "They will, my lady." He squeezed my shoulder, a light pressure of comfort before he grasped Strawberry's halter. "I expect I notice it more because I'm a servant. All the bad ones show their true faces to their underlings a long time before their equals even notice they're wearing a mask." I offered him a small smile. "There, that's better," he said. "I like to see you smiling, laughing if you can manage it." He started to lead Strawberry toward her stall. "But I can brush her down and—" "No, my lady, you best go inside. I doubt your father would appreciate you coming in smelling of the stable. Remember, Sir Mordred's the provincial minister at court, a man your father wants to impress as much as possible. And be forewarned, they're in the midst of hammering out that betrothal contract between Lady Dagmar and Sir Selwyn." "Oh, dear. I bet poor father's in a state. Thank you, Bolton." I headed towards the house. Dagmar had attracted some notice at court, but no firm offers aside from Selwyn's, so father had far less bargaining power with the Landers than he would have liked. I expected it had been a grueling afternoon for him. As I went up the main staircase and down the second-floor hallway to my chamber, the low rumble of voices in Father's study dogged the clicks of my heeled riding boots. The door was open just a crack, enough for me to hear Father say, "But that only leaves the south fields for Sapphire's dowry, and those are half swamp. Avernal, don't forget your elder daughter will be allied with the House of Landers. If you play your cards right, that alliance alone should help you secure a good match for your younger daughter, no matter the size of her dowry," said a smooth, deep voice that immediately put me in mind of Peregrine. My hackles rose. Play my cards right? Father sounded upset. Oh no, he'd never be able to bargain his way around Mordred now. Even though I had never seen this Mordred and only just heard his voice for the first time, I could already tell he was a sphinx, the sort who would try to manipulate others' displays of emotion to his advantage, just like Peregrine. "This is not a poker game," Father continued. "This is my daughter's future. I can't bluff my way out of a swamp." "Why not? I realize this is a serious matter and not a game, but it still would behoove you to think of it that way. If you thought of it as a game, it might allow you to be more objective about it, which could in turn lead to a better outcome." Father exhaled heavily. "You don't have daughters, Mordred." "True enough. Trust me, though, sons are no easier. There are days I would trade Marius for a passel of well-behaved daughters." I could detect no warmth in Mordred's tone when he spoke of his son, only a cold, slightly amused weariness. What a wretched man. There came a clatter, then a rattle of what sounded like thick parchment. "Now, back to the matter at hand. From the Landers' perspective, the harbor is useless without all the north fields and woods." "All the north fields?" Father demanded. "How can you say all?" "Avernal, look at the map of your estate." The parchment rattled again. "There's no point in including that harbor with Dagmar's dowry if you don't also include a ready way to access it." I had heard enough. Poor Father. By the time this Mordred got done with him, I doubt even the pigsty would be left for my dowry. Moving as quietly as I could, I proceeded down the hall to my chamber, where I removed my boots and concealed my satchel and portfolio in the trunk. Remembering the silver, how could I have forgotten? I felt around the bottom of the satchel for it. My hand closed around the hard, surprisingly heavy circle, the tiny ridges around the edge pressing into my fingertips, the cool metal soon warming at my touch. I pulled it out and examined it. I had never really looked at a silver before. How pretty it was, with the cormorant stag prancing across it. I traced the branches of the stag's antlers before I fisted my hand around the silver. The first coin I had ever earned from my sketches, the first coin I could truly call mine. I'd have to buy more drawing paper with it, but for now I would treasure it, a symbol that one day I might earn enough coin with my sketches to go to Sarnath and learn painting. I brushed the wind snarls from my hair and slid on my best slippers. Then I glanced at my reflection to make certain there was no dirt smudged on my face. I assumed Mordred was staying for dinner, and the last thing I wanted was some highfalutin Landers looking down his nose at us. As I left the chamber in search of Dagmar, I wanted to tell her what I had learned about the dowry negotiations. I heard the scrape of chair legs across the floorboards, then the loud thump of Father's boots. He poked his head around the edge of the study door. His hair stuck out in gingery wisps, his orange aura tattered and frayed about the edges, a sign he felt harried. "Oh," he said, "I thought you might be Dagmar. She's supposed to sign this." "I'm going to find her. Do you want me to tell her to come up here?" I realized then that I still held the silver in my hand. Feeling foolish, I started to put it in my skirt pocket, but couldn't quite bring myself to let it go yet. "That would be good of you, Sapphire. First, though, I'd like you to meet Sir Mordred." As I went through the doorway of the study, I patted Father's shoulder in an attempt to untie some of the knots in his sinews. He was so tense that I half expected to hear his muscles twang when I touched him. Mordred rose then, and I was shocked to see he had a sword strapped to his belt. It wasn't that I had never seen an armed man before. Father carried a dagger when he went out, and Peregrine wore a sword, but never in the house. He always left it at the front door. What kind of man carried a sword in the house? My curiosity now rampant, I examined him more closely than I might have otherwise. Tall as Peregrine, but lean, and gray. Gray hair, gray eyes, gray doublet, gray aura. The only bits of color were some deep maroon blotches scattered throughout his aura, the bleeding wounds of a scarred, suspicious spirit. Perhaps he had been to battle? That would explain why he carried weapons everywhere he went, and why he moved with the spare, quiet grace of a swordsman. Mordric, this is my younger daughter Sapphire, Father said, his hand curling around my elbow briefly before he reclaimed his seat. Pleased to meet you, sir. I gave a slight curtsy, the standard pleasantry. Good afternoon, my lady. He inclined his head before sitting back down. I couldn't believe how efficiently lithe he was. Not one extraneous movement. Had to be a swordsman. Have you been to battle? I asked. Sapphire, Father's voice held a warning note. None of your questions now. Sir Mordric and I have to finish this. Mordric ignored him. I was a commander in the King's Guard when I was young. Oh, you don't seem like you were ever young. Oh, no, I stammered, suddenly realizing what I had just said. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Sapphire. Father's voice dipped dangerously low, the way he had said my name when I was a child and due for a switching. Mordric met my gaze, and I swallowed under his unblinking, expressionless scrutiny. I felt like a worm squirming on top of a clod of earth he had just kicked over, a poor worm desperately seeking the safety of the dark again. Thank goodness Selwyn doesn't want to marry you, he said evenly before he returned to Father. I hope Dagmar doesn't have a tongue like that. No, of course not. Father rushed to reassure him. You must forgive Sapphire. She's not been out in company much. Mordric chuckled, a mirthless sound. I can see now why you're so concerned with this one's dowry. Her husband will need the balm of a good dowry to take the sting out of her company. Rage flickered through me. How dare he insult me thus? What I'd said must have touched some nerve, though this man seemed too frozen to have nerves. The edge of the silver cut into my palm. I looked down at it, the rage going from a flicker to an inferno. I'm sorry I offended you, sir, I said, my fingers closing around the coin again. It must be difficult for you when the cattle you trade with such cold-blooded skill start speaking your native tongue and show an uncanny understanding of the slaughter you intend for them. Triumph flared inside when Mordric started. I had managed to take this ice-veined blackguard by surprise. His eyes narrowed as he appraised me with his gaze. Then I caught Father's slack-jawed look. He was so shocked that he was past anger at this point, though I was certain I would be in loads of trouble later. Loads. Oh dear, I hadn't meant to upset him. I never meant to upset him, but somehow I always did. Still clutching the coin, I whirled around and fled the study before I made a bad situation worse. How I wish I could tell Father that he needn't worry about my dowry so much, that he needn't treat with men like this Mordric to secure my future. How I wanted to tell him about the coin I'd earned today. How I longed to tell him that with enough hard work and a little luck I could find my own destiny. But telling would do no good. He would never believe me. I'd have to show him, show them all, and then maybe they would believe. You've been listening to Fledgling Witch by Karen Nilsson, read by Ellen Furman, edited and produced by Kim Clark for Noble Sparrow Studio. The email address is noblesparrowstudio@gmail.com. About the author. As a child, Karen suffered frequent bouts of insomnia. The only way she could settle into sleep many nights was to imagine stories that played out like movies on the dark ceiling over her bed. Since her mean parents refused to replace the TV after the cat blew it up by peeing on the cord, all Karen had left to entertain herself in the lone wilds of the Minnesota wilderness were books and her own stories. As Karen grew, the stories grew with her. One day when she was 14, she told her mother one of these stories for probably the 100th time. Her mother, who knew Karen very well, turned to her and said, "You know, Karen, you keep talking about these stories, but you never write them down. You keep saying you're going to write a novel, but I don't believe that you will." This comment infuriated Karen so much that she started writing her stories down and hasn't stopped since. Acknowledgements. Even though my parents are no longer on this plane of existence, their love and example as self-employed artists inspires me to this day and always will. Special thanks to the many friends and mentors who have encouraged me through the years with my writing, too numerous to name here. Just know that without each and every one of you in my life, I never could have written this book.